much
Kelly.
for joining us. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thanks again for joining our monthly coffee chat here. To get us started, I want to introduce Caitlin Lowans, our Artistic Director of Theatreworks. She joined UCCS in August of 2018 after completing her Master of Fine Arts in Theater Directing at Northwestern University. She also received her bachelor's degree from Georgetown, majoring in international politics before pursuing her MFA. So welcome, Caitlin, and welcome to all of our supporters.
Thanks, Bo. Welcome to everyone. Good morning, Dick and Sandra. Good morning, John. Good morning, Al. Good morning, Gina. Good morning, Ed. And good morning. Good morning, Ed. Good morning, Geoffrey Kent, who is being played by the Canfields today for the purposes of Zoom names. And so I'm going to do the thing where just like Bo made me slightly uncomfortable by reading my bio in front of me, Jeff, I'm going to allow you to have your own emotional reaction to me reading your bio in front of you. And so I'll introduce Jeff, and then Jeff and I will chat. I have some questions about his origin story in the theater, and then the investigation of today's play club. After last month, Jeff, we talked to John D'Antonio of Creed Rep about how artistic directors plan seasons. And so now we're excited to talk to you about how directors begin to think about work on a project before they invite their other collaborators in. So we'll hear about you as a human and an artist, but then also investigate like what are those first seeds that you like to water as a director and how you go about doing that. And then maybe if we have time, we will have a short interactive activity where we can all pretend to be directors. What a treat. All right, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about Jeff. So this is Geoffrey Kent. He is a director, an actor, and a fight director. He is known to you all, perhaps as Theatreworks audiences, for his work directing Santaland Diaries, Born Yesterday, The Lying Kind, It's a Wonderful Life, the radio play, You Can't Take It With You, The 39 Steps, and Grapes of Wrath. Did I get them all, Jeff?
Yeah, I think so. I think I've done 7.
7, that sounds right, as well as some fight direction work. And around the Colorado stages, you've seen him at Colorado Shakespeare Festival, the Denver Center, the Arvada Center, both in the physical universe and the virtual universe that we were chit-chatting about when you first joined us. The Utah Shakespeare Festival, the American Shakespeare Center, Orlando Shakespeare Theater, and recent directing projects at Arvada include Murder on the Orient Express, The Foreigner, and Waiting for Godot. And upcoming projects, exciting for anything upcoming, include Macbeth at the Illinois Shakespeare Festival. And
Sooner or later.
Sooner or later. And I love this sentence from your website that you are one of only 20 fight masters with the Society of American Fight Directors. So we are on a Zoom call with not only a director, but also a fight master. Is there anything else that you would want these good people to know about you before we?
No, I think that's a great intro. Actually, I think that kind of covers the basics.
Cool, I love it. So going back to the beginning of yourself as a theater person, Jeff, I always like to ask what folks' origin story is within the theater. How did you come to be the multifaceted theater artist that you are?
The sidebar of this was because of the pandemic. I haven't been in a theater performing in front of an audience, like on a stage, for about a year. It'll be a year next month. And I asked my wife this morning on a walk with the dogs. She's in Colorado, I'm in Utah right now, but we're both walking dogs and talking. I was like, when's the last time you spent it was a whole year since you've been on stage? And she's like, it's been like 4 or 5 years. She goes, but how long has it been for you? And I was like, 6th grade. It's been since 6th grade that I've not been in a play for a year. It is crazy. But I got into plays in middle school so I wouldn't get beat up on the bus. And I got into plays in high school, desperate for a social group that would accept me, and found that theater was the place where that would work. I went to college for theater and education and struggled in college. It didn't really suit me. So I moved from that into freelance work. So in my 20s, I was trying to pay the bills, but still get to act. So what I was doing was murder mysteries, which is funny because I'm about to do one. I thought I was done with those. Murder mysteries, Renaissance Festival. I worked at the Colorado Renaissance Festival for 4 summers, sword fighting in the dirt, and corporate character walk around, where I would be like, Wild Bill Hickok at a corporate event and walk around to tables and teach people how to crack whips and things. So, but throughout my 20s, I was doing community theater at a full-time job, and I was doing a lot of action. So my into professional theater was that when I had a sword in my hand, suddenly things made more sense to me than when I didn't. And what I mean by that is actors are always looking for playable actions. And one of the things we talk about in theater a lot is subtext. I say one thing, but I mean something else. And 25-year-old me did not understand that at all. But I understood to slash, to cut, to stab, to shove, to punch, to kick. That all kind of made sense, which is really interesting because I was not an athletic kid at all. But the act of being a hero, you know, I played Dungeons and Dragons and I love Lord of the Rings. And I think there was just an in for my childhood imagination was activated when I had a sword. So I could make these choices I would never make before. But what happened was I had a day job doing community theater, not making really any money in theater, but I was making money teaching stage combat. So I started working at middle schools. I think one of my first choreography jobs as a fight choreographer was The Outsiders at a small middle school where I taught a bunch of sixth graders how to beat each other up for pretend. That moved to high school work, that moved to undergraduate work, that moved to me teaching at the National Theater Conservatory, which was the MFA theater program associated with the Denver Center for the Performing Arts. That then led me across the street to choreographing shows at the Denver Center for the Performing Arts. That started in about 1999. And then for the last 21 years, I've kind of made a living first as an action creator. Then ultimately what happened was they went, well, if you're good at sword fighting, we should just put you in the play, which is what I wanted to do in the first place. But so suddenly I was on stage at the Denver Center having never auditioned. They just needed a sword fighter and hired me straight up, which is the best way to get a job. Is to just know someone. So suddenly, every time the Denver Center did a Shakespeare play, Hamlet, Richard III, Othello, I was there in a very small part, usually a few lines, but overseeing the action every single day of rehearsal and every single fight call as we ran the show. So I was acting and fight directing, and then what happened was I really it's so classic, right? What I really want to do is direct, and so. Because the act of being a fight director was collaborative. And what I like about theater and what makes us better as artists is to be in a room with lots of ideas and then be able to call them. So as a fight director, I would be interacting with costume designers. Where's the blood pack go? Set designers, we got to fall down these stairs. Light designers, you can't put lights in their eyes when they're stabbing each other. Sound designers, let's orchestrate this action with that. And so working both in opera, ballet, and professional theater, I was cross-collaborating like crazy. And then I started stepping outside of my job a little bit. Like I've already stabbed Hamlet, but I'm kind of talking with him about how the poison works and how to die. And I'm kind of talking with this actor about how to carry a sword. And my interest started expanding outside of action as an orchestrator. So no one was going to hire me to direct. So I convinced someone to produce a play out of their own pocket to do what I call Cowboy Macbeth, which was it was just Mackers set in the Wild West. Because my theory was you could do a dramatic Western like Unforgiven, right? That was my goal, was how can you do a Shakespeare play as a Western, but not for jokes? And because, you know, as you all know, I've seen at Theatreworks, and I've done every Shakespeare comedy almost as a Western, because it works really well, because it's goofy and fun. But it was great to do it as a drama. And I asked Murray Ross to come up and see it, because I'd fight directed for Murray many times. And obviously I was wanting to direct more. Murray comes up to see it. Then Murray calls me and he says, hey, I didn't like your play very much. I was like, thanks, Murray, straight shot. But I wanted to talk with you about it. So we kind of talked about, he was like, you made one scene work really well that is hard to make work, and tell me how you did that. And we talked for a little bit about what I felt about the scene, and he of course knows all these plays well. And then I said, well, I'm looking for an opportunity to assistant direct. Do you have anything coming up? Because I'd like to learn more. And he said, well, we're going to do Grapes of Wrath next year, and why don't you come down and talk to me about that? So I'm like, cool. So they bring me down, and I meet him for lunch, and they start asking me questions about what I would do with Grapes of Wrath. That's the question you get asked as a director, like, what are you going to do with it? And I'm like, so here's the confession to this group that I've already confessed to Caitlin, and it's one of my favorite stories, is I had never read Grapes of Wrath, the play or the novel. I had never seen the film Grapes of Wrath. I knew nothing about the Grapes of Wrath because I thought I was going down to interview for assistance directing, meaning I thought I was just there to for him to let me know how assistantship works and if I was interested. So foolishly maybe, but and probably more without a naivete, I just drove down there to hang out with him. And then it became an interview about the play that I had never read and knew nothing about, other than somewhere in my head, I knew about the Jodes. I knew the Jodes were important. I knew they were the core part of the story. And I remember them asking, like, well, what about the Jodes? I'm like, well, it all hangs on the Jodes. I mean, if you don't get the Jodes right, the rest of the play isn't going to work. And then he's like, well, how do you find that arc? I'm like, we just got to follow it to its natural end. I mean, I am being so vague. Well, what do you see it like scenically? I'm like, well, very bare, because, you know, you really want to focus on, I don't think you need a lot of scenery because I knew they were going to California, like, because they travel. So we want to be in all these places. So I think something very simple. And I was currently doing Plain Song at the Denver Center as an actor, and it was set with a big cyc and wooden board floors. So I basically described the set of the play I was currently in as a great set for Grapes of Wrath. And when this is done, he says, well, great, because we'd like you to direct it. And I'd now just given a pitch for a show that I knew nothing about. I actually did know Mice and Men, so I assumed it was similar. So I kind of bluffed my way accidentally into a directing job with 35 actors, fire, water, a car, and live music. And it was way over my head. It was such a big show for me. And what I had going for me was the faith of the producer and the support of the producer. And also I'd staged a lot of big mass fights as a fight director. So I knew how to orchestrate lots of people, like, visually. And I would say that what I learned from that is not to let your play get over designed. I learned a lot of things. You learn a lot in those first, any job you've ever had, you learn a lot in those first times. And I made a lot of mistakes. I had to fire an actor, which I've never done and never will again, but that was assigned to me to do. And during tech, the truck kept popping its tires and then being stuck center stage for the entirety of tech. And our set had over 3 miles of lumber in it. It was way, way bigger than it. I broke the tech director completely. Like, I think he was sleeping there 4 hours a day and just hammering boards. But in the end, I also really am proud of the play we created. And I think it was cast really well. And it was my first play with Sammy Joe Kinnett, who I am now, who's been in almost every play. He's been in half the plays I've ever directed, and he's been in every play but one I've directed at Theatreworks. And in fact, Sammy Joe was going to be in that Macbeth at Illinois Shakes, because I dragged him to another state because this is how I feel about him. And I learned a lot. And then I didn't mess it up so badly that I got a chance to come back and direct another play. And then I got to suggest 39 Steps, because then I earned the right to suggest the play. Because when you start out as a director, you don't pick the play. The play picks you. In Soviet Russia, play picks you. Theaters call you and go, this is something I'm looking at doing. Would you be interested? And then you're like, can I fall in love with this play in 24 hours or not? You know, that's the question. So that's a long answer, but I think it covered a couple of the big steps, Caitlin, if that helped.
It absolutely did. I also was appreciating the irony of inviting you to talk about what director preparation looks like, when you are also admitting that it is somewhat possible to luck your way into a job with absolutely zero prior knowledge. So there's a juicy tension there.
And I got wet.
And then I kept not reading it, because I just wanted to see how long I could go without knowing anything about it. I did eventually read it.
And I got wet.
You got wet?
Yay! Sammy Joe took a pretty hard plunge in that river. It was a splashdown section for sure.
So let's start with because now I mean, there's so much I want to hear about, Jeff, but like let's also, I want to stick for a second on this idea of a director prepares. So you just use the phrase, how do I fall in love with a play over the next 24 hours? Can we start with that idea of love?
Yeah.
And like, how do you fall in love with plays?
I think the hardest thing to do is to direct a play as a job that you weren't interested in. And I think an actor would tell you the same thing. It's like, we all want to work all the time, but I've traveled to Florida to do a Shakespeare play that in a small part, and then just kind of been like, I miss home. Why am I here? I don't mean the lead, but I didn't find something to fall in love with what I was doing. And as a result, I was counting the minutes until I got home. You know, it became an acting exercise to pretend I was enthusiastic. And I think as a director, I think it's important to understand it's very rare we are attached to a play. It happens, but for the most part, theater, like John D'Antonio, I'm sure described you, who was one of my students at the NTC. John D'Antonio would explain to you, like, he's got to dream that season up. And sometimes when they're dreaming it up, they're thinking of directors, or they're thinking of what they themselves want to direct. And other times they're like, how do these plays work together? How do they work as a season? And then you start sending feelers out to directors to go, I've got this play, I'm looking for a director, are you interested? And each theater's different, but often you know they're probably talking to more than one person about this play, and they're in a way auditioning your idea. Colorado Shakespeare Festival totally does that. When I directed Midsummer Night's Dream at the Colorado Shakespeare Festival, where I'd acted already for 10 years, I had 7 meetings to describe what I wanted to do with Midsummer Night's Dream. And I don't really know across those 7 meetings when I got the job. It was before the 7th meeting, but I don't know when it happened because I didn't get the offer until after the 7th. But at some point it went from auditioning my idea to just making sure they understood it so they could produce my idea. But what that means is, Caitlin, such a great question, is, you know, sometimes someone comes to you and goes, like, do you want to direct Midsummer? And I'm like, absolutely. 1, I love directing. And 2, I love that play. It means something to me. I think it's funny. I think it works. And other times they're like, direct The Tempest. And I'm like, I don't like The Tempest. I've never seen a good production of The Tempest. And when I read The Tempest, I find it to be long monologues that aren't exciting to me. It doesn't mean it's not a great play. It means as a director, if I can envision something about the play, staging wise, casting wise, musically, tonally, for me, it's often, where's the comedy in it? Not even if it isn't a comedy, can I find humor? Or is there a character in it that I'm like, not that I want to play because I'm the director, but is there a character's journey in it that I feel I can illuminate and make the audience have a catharsis or a moment of empathy for? Is there a villain I can create an opportunity for us to love them a little bit? Is there a protagonist that I can find a great flaw in? And now that I've directed, 20 or 30 plays, I'm able to go to say no to one. I just did it last year. I was offered Flea in Her Ear, the David Ives adaptation. It's really funny, big cast. It's a farce. It's got like 9 doors. People run. It's like Noises Off, right? All these things running around. A lot of these plot lines. But it was in the round, and I was like, I don't know how to do a 9-door comic farce in the round. I need doors. And they're like, well, we could do half doors. I'm like, here are reviews of productions that have done half doors that have all been torn apart in the review. It doesn't mean a bad review means the audience didn't like it. But I was like, I know Jeff, to direct this play, need real doors. And since this space can't do it, I walked away from the show because I couldn't picture it, So it's love it or picture it. Does that make sense, Caitlin? It's kind of like, I'm sure you feel the same as like, when you got a play that really speaks to you and you're excited to go to rehearsal because you just can't wait to work on it, that's the feeling you want to have. So you're looking for that.
It absolutely does. How do you, so what I'm hearing is that maybe your entry point into different plays is different. That for your entry point on one production, it might be a human journey that you're following. And for another, it might be a physical moment that you can imagine creating, and then you're going to build the world around that physical moment. So different plays require different ends for you. Yeah.
Like last year I directed Murder on the Orient Express at the Arvada Center in the round, and that play takes place on a train, and it goes to multiple different train cars. And I looked at videos of like productions of it to get a feel for it, and they were all proscenium, all, they trucked cars on and off, and I was like, well, I got to figure out. And as soon as I went, I could do it with chairs, with mathematical precision and grid lights, and then use classical pieces of music and orchestrate the scene changes to Flight of the Bumblebee, so that on the final note of Flight of the Bumblebee, they all turn the lights on and go boom, and they're in the scene. And once I started seeing that, that's what I knew I had to play. And I saw that before I accepted it. It didn't mean I was holding them off, but I was like, I need to, if I can't, what's the problem of this play? You're doing As You Like It. They're going to spend an act and a half in one location, and they're going to spend 3.5 acts in another. How are you going to handle the forest? How are you going to do it? How are you going to bring a bear on stage? You're doing Winter's Tale. How do I get a bear on stage? You kind of have to, you're not going to figure that out in rehearsal. You got to figure that out before rehearsal, before casting, So every play's got its impossible moments. So I also like to attack those.
Yes, the impossible moments. And what's the balance that you like to strike between because this is somewhat a session about talking about the work that happens before other collaborators come in.
Yeah.
But is there a balance you like to strike, or a way that's worked for you of thinking about what are the projects that are Jeff projects and what are the projects that you can like put in another bucket and say, okay, when other folks come join me, then we'll get into that bucket?
Yeah, and I think I'll be really honest, as a new director, because I'm what I call a blue collar theater artist. Like I don't have a master's degree, and in all honesty with this group, I don't even have an undergraduate degree. I have a high school diploma, and I've done hundreds of plays. So I've kind of learned on the job. And when I was a director at first, the step that I did not know how to do was how to meet with designers. Because so the director will get the job, and then oftentimes the designers, who are very, very important, are picked for you. Right? This is the design team we use. And you're like, great, I don't know any of these people. Here we go. And then now I've learned to kind of go, yeah, but I'd like my costume designer, or that's great, but can I get my sound designer? So there's a cross collaboration where I'm bringing new artists to the theater that they haven't met, and I'm getting to meet artists at the theater that I don't know at all. When it's my first time somewhere, I'm almost always going to 100% inherit my design team. For Mackers at Illinois Shakes, they have a team, and I'm the new person. So they all know each other and have done dozens of plays, and I'm the jerk that's going to show up and ask them questions. So the trick to me to preparing as a director is, one, I read the play every day. If not every day, every other. If it's really long, I might read just an act. But my eyes are on the text of the play from the day I accept the job, pretty much until first rehearsal. And then from first rehearsal on, I'm looking at it anyway, because I have to know the play, and not just the plot. I have to really know the tone of each scene and a feel for where I feel the arcs of the play are for the characters in the scenes before I meet with designers. Because what I learned early, and Grapes of Wrath was a perfect example, is I met with my designers and they had tons of ideas, and I just said yes to all of them because I didn't feel like, as a new director, I needed to bring ideas to them. I was just saying yes to I was yes-anding everything. Great. You told me we can have miles of lumber in a car and water and fire. Great. And then I realized in tech that was way too much, and it was way over the heads, and everybody was hitting the wall. And I was like, whoops. So now I know when I meet designers how I want to frame it. Like the worst thing I could say to a costume designer is like, I want to do this Shakespeare play. When do you think we should set it? Yeah, like to me, that's like saying you pick the concept to the costume designer, and then the costumes become the concept. And I don't want the concept of the play to be the costumes. So, for example, Comedy of Errors. I'm directing that for Colorado Shakespeare Festival like about 6 years ago. And I know when I'm reading the play, I want to gender swap it, that I want the male leads to be played by women and be played as female characters, and I want the women in the play to be played by males. And then I'm like, well, I need to find a world where women could be successful, but it still be a little out of place. So I look around, I go, oh, 1930s Paris, the art scene was having some really interesting cross-gender things. And there was great success to be made by running clubs by women. So there was women in business who could be out and about. So before I meet with my costume designer, I already know I'm going to set it in Paris. I already know that I'm going to gender swap it. But what I'm asking the costume designer is like late 1920s, early 1930s, is there a component to the costumes that would help you with storytelling if we lean this play a decade forward or backwards? Where do we want to break the rules so you can tell a good story? When I go to a set designer, I'm like, it's a farce, so it's about doors, but I don't want to be literal. So how can you help me? So we end up with a 20-foot tall giant red door that can rotate and open and slam with a tiny doggy door you can go through. Because the problem of Comedy of Errors was there's a scene where people are inside and people are outside. And every time I've seen it, the door opens and they talk through the faceplate, but I wanted to see that action. So we created a door that we could rotate 90 degrees so you could be inside and outside at the same time. So that I knew for the scene designers, I want giant doors, but then they had to keep throwing different doors at me until we found it. So I look for an element to throw at a designer, but I have to trust that the light designer, the set designer, the costume designer, the sound designer are all really great at their jobs. So it's a collaboration where I bracket them and then I let them bounce around in it, which is kind of like rehearsal with actors. I want to let them try big choices, but I don't want to let them I don't want them all to be in different plays. They all need to be in 1930s Paris. So I need to kind of structure them to the world. So like when I cast two women in those leads and they're clowns and they're whacking each other and they're like, well, we don't really want to hit each other. We don't think we do that. I'm like, I hear you, but the line is, please pluck your fingers from my ear. So are you asking me to cut the line, or can we find a truth for this line that works for a feminine relationship? And they're like, let's do wet willies, and let's do nose bonks, and let's do like light slaps, or like one of them wanted to punch the other in the boob. And I was like, well, if the two of you want to do that, we can do that. She's like, I want to have a purse, and I want to beat her with the purse. And like, I was the guy director saying, I think ladies, you hit each other with your purses. I'm a jerk. But the actors really wanted to try that. So we tried it. So it's, I bracket, I define the walls, and then I let the artists, be they designers or actors, bounce within those walls. And then over the course of rehearsal, we'll probably start to bring those walls in a little tighter, right? And the one I could never do is talk to light designers, because the only two things I used to be able to say to light designers is, this should be really bright, it's a comedy, or lots of shadow because this play is dramatic. That was all I ever had. I've gotten a little bit better at working with light designers in terms of, now I make sure one, light, sets, and costumes and I are all talking, because color is a big deal. And explaining the energy of transitions, because lights to me are, I don't like audiences sitting in the dark. So all my light designers get we're going to light this transition and we're going to watch it. So I want you to think about how to do that, that kind of thing. But I like to ask some questions, like, how do you see this? What do you think about this time period? And let them run. So yeah, I think you're a collaborator, but you're the quarterback or you're the coach, right? So I have a producer above me, but my job is to finagle and wrangle all of these artists to one goal, so everybody's not pushing the play in different directions, which can happen.
Yeah, and you used the metaphor earlier, and you're doing it with the walls, but like of the frame, yeah. Right? Oh, look, and we're within these Zoom boxes, right? So we're all very familiar with frame. I think I love the way that you're talking about that, Jeff, because I think oftentimes, and the example that you used of like, when is the play being set, and the costumes, these things are thought of as concepts that are layered on top of a work, as opposed to what you're offering is a frame that takes what the work is already sharing with us, but draws our attention to it because a particular part of that work or a particular dynamic is being explored through the bounds that you've set, which makes total sense to me. How hard is it? I'm thinking about, I love it when you began chatting and you were like, this idea for yourself that when I had a sword in my hand, things made more sense. And I'm thinking, it reminds me of, there's Anne Bogart, who's this like theater director and practitioner. She talks about the violence of choice and getting really excited about the fact that like, when you choose one thing, the other things are no longer what you're doing, and that like there's a violence to that and you have to embrace it, rather than sort of saying, what if we did both things? And this is not a question, this is like an invitation. Yeah, this is an invitation to reflect on like, how are you with saying no? Is it like a collaborative saying no as a director? Is that part of your toolbox? Do you do other things?
It's definitely necessary, and it was not there when I started, man. I didn't want to say no to anybody because I was worried I'd lose the room or create animosity between me and someone. And then you get into tech and it all goes to shit, because every designer is, the light designer's pulling it towards the lights and the set designer's pulling it over here. And part of the ways you do that is, as you mature, you start to build teams, right? Like I have a go-to light designer, set designer, costume designer, sound designer, that when I can get any combination of them in the room, I know tech will be light, funny, creative, and focused, right? I need humor in tech because tech is stressful. And if we can't laugh at ourselves, what the fuck? Man, I'm in a mood today. Sorry, I apologize. But I think a constructive no is really good. And I think the way you earn the no is by letting them try their idea. Yeah. So let's say I'm meeting with a set designer and they give me a sketch, which has happened to me. And I'm like, I like none of this sketch, right? They have given me their first idea and I can't, and I'm looking at it and I hate it. And I don't want to begin our first meeting with, this is terrible, give me something else. But I might go with, I don't think this serves the concept of the play, and here's why. But I do think we're headed towards that with, and I will always find something that they have done that I like. Even the part of it I like, I know I'm ultimately going to let them keep. I pick something to celebrate so that I can direct them towards the change that I want, versus saying, I don't like this, give me something else, right? And it's the same with actors. You're like, it's easier to tell an actor no after you've given them a yes, right? So Sammy Joe is a perfect example of an actor that works really well with me, and I work really well with him. It's because, one, I have complete trust in his comic ability. I have complete trust in his acting ability, which means the room for him is really big. I can let him run around in it because once I've let him try 17 things, I could be like, it was option 14 that was the best. What do you think? And if he goes, yeah, then boom, we've immediately thrown out all those other choices. We get to drop into a real one and then enhance that choice. So that if we're heading into tech and still haven't decided what the blocking is, you can't light it, you can't stage it. So louder, faster, funnier, but ultimately your first pass through the play should be to give them as much room to play as possible. And then every pass through the play, you're tightening by cutting the things that don't work. And everyone will take a cut better if they've had a chance to try it, right? So, try the Brussels sprouts and then I'll let you not eat them. And it's the same thing in rehearsal. Like, that worked, but I think it's got to be on the couch. This scene has to be here. So can you make that work there? And they go, yeah, so if you're going to collaborate, you got to let them try. But you do, I think, Caitlin, the importance of a no, the importance of, that would work, but not in this production, is necessary. Because otherwise you just enter tech with this messy play that you're hoping tech focuses for you, and it just won't work. Caitlin's not moving at all. But it's a great position.
Jump back on. Do we have any audience questions for Jeff?
Yeah, you've certainly seen work I've done, and I love talking about just the act of directing, that process. So if you've got questions there, I'd love to answer them.
I think I've seen all of your fight scenes at Theatreworks, and probably most of them at the Denver Center Theater Company. But I think the most fight scene that still stands out in my mind was the Spanish Fly in the pit at the Barbican. And we were just in the front row, and I think Dick and Sandy were there down at the pit, the Barbican, seeing Spanish Fly many, many years ago. And we were there in your front row. You're right in the middle of that fight scene. And all of a sudden, a tongue comes out across the floor. It falls under your seat. But I love fight scenes, and you do a very good job on them.
Oh, thanks, Ed. I think the art to making a good fight scene is to know the story of the fight before you choreograph the fight. And that is something just like directing, which is how I built my directing skills, was, if you're going to have Hamlet and Laertes have a sword fight, or you're going to do like the Cyrano, I choreographed at Theatreworks with Chris Lewin and Benaya, were the two sword fighters there, is I want to meet with those two actors, the director and me, and we're going to sit and just kind of write, not literally, but out loud, be able to say the story of this fight is that Valverde is there to kill him, and it slowly realizes he's up against someone better. Or the story of this fight is that Valverde didn't think a fight would happen and he's terrible. Or the story of this fight is that Cyrano is teasing him before he kills. He's playing with his food before he eats it. So having choreographed Cyrano and Valverde like a dozen times, I don't come in with the same fight. Those two actors and this director, the four of us are going to kind of discuss it, and then we're going to create it. So if you know the story, not the moves, then the moves then it doesn't matter whether I'm cutting your arm or your leg. What I want to do is know that I'm playing with you. I am mocking you. Or I want to play with, I'm here to destroy you, which will change the tenor of it. So you're always trying to make sure the actors can take their acting skills with text and bring them to movement, so that the movement is performed versus movement that has been codified and I do this, because then they're robots. Welcome back, Caitlin.
Thanks, y'all. I'm on 2 computers right now. It's a little strange. But I'm excited that you're connecting over your fight work. I have one more question. I have a question about that intersection, and then I want to see whether other folks from the group had things they wanted to ask you about. But I'm interested in that, and you may have already just answered it, but I wanted to know about the sort of intersection of your fight and directing work, and how they've, how you feel like they've helped each other grow and change over time. Like, I think I have a sense of how you started, but what have you?
Well, I'm going to see. Can I share a screen here? Can you all see this?
Yes.
I'm going to go. I don't know what devices everybody's on, but I'm just pulling up here just some directing photos of productions I've worked on. And I would say that where the fight work overlapped the directing work was composition, right? Is that I'm a really big fan that the stage picture viewed from any seat tells a story without any words at all, right? And that's like a basic directing thing, but for me, it was the key to directing the play. So like if I'm doing Metamorphosis, that's when his daughter has turned to gold, right? And I knew that I needed to have him looking away and that I needed him unable to see it. Or Godot, we had this puddle in the floor, and the designer and I knew we wanted to feel like we had a moon, and we wanted to reflect the puddle with the moon. And I knew the end of the play had to be the two of them standing in a puddle. One of their pants falls down around their ankles while they stare at this metaphorical moon in the sky. When we were doing Tempest, we knew we wanted Ariel to be on silks, to never touch the floor, or at least always be connected, so we could create a stage picture where Prospero's above, she's in the middle, and everyone else is below and looking up. So I'm directing the audience's eye upwards. So this is the Comedy Bears with the giant door that we rotated, right? And I knew I wanted one person on this side and the entire community stuck outside of this house that wants to go to this party that they can't get to. So I would say where fight work overlapped directing work is stage picture, right? Audience with flags. I knew I wanted the audience to have flags, and I knew they'd wave them whenever anyone on their side yelled at them. Or I knew I wanted, this is where I get everybody wet, Ed, and every play I do, I like to splash water at the audience. I knew I wanted her beside her alone with her face covered when we first saw her. So like, I'm really big into like, I knew I wanted a big floppy tail on Caliban for the Tempest. I knew that I wanted him to be holding that dead baby as he floated it in the waters. I needed him in the river with the baby, right? So we have to design the play towards that. So I'd say that like, this was the big moment in at Theatreworks where I knew I wanted the last moment of the play to not be on book. It was a radio play, but I needed it to burst into theatricality. So the final moments weren't being read. And that's where we threw the scripts in the air, and the last 2 pages of the play was just no scripts. And that was kind of how we tried to find that moment. That's the dragon. So I guess like for me, where action became direction was definitely a dynamic stage picture, and also making sure my set can help me create dynamic stage pictures. Flat sets are really tough. So I like a lot of levels when the budget allows it. I like a lot of bomb lines, so I can put actors on stage looking in, but not blocking your view because you paid to see it and they didn't. So yeah, I'd say that was the big crossover for me. But I should add, when you're coaching actors and you're always like trying to have them find actions, like you want to play, this is like to teach them something, or this is to intimidate someone. All my examples when I started teaching directing were all violent. They're like you want to stab him with this language. You just really want to slice them. You just want to crush them. And I was like, I really got to find more actions that are not violent.
Some gentle, loving language in there as well. I love it. Team who are not me, do we have questions that y'all want to ask Jeff, or things you would love to hear him dig into a little bit more?
What about cuts? Suppose there isn't a short Shakespeare play, as far as I know, and what do you do? How do you decide between whole scenes or just one line, or subbing some line for the original?
That is an incredibly good question, because I think there's an art to that, and I'm not going to say I'm the master of it, but I have evolved. And what I mean by that is I've now learned, we're going to go back to what I said earlier about reading the play every day, is that I find often as an actor, I receive Shakespeare plays with cuts, and I can sometimes tell whether the director knew the play well or not. Because if they don't know the play well, they're just looking for like, the scene's too long, and they just cut half of the speech, and they don't realize that, well, now they've cut the conclusion of the argument, so now the speech makes no sense. You see it in film all the time, like especially Shakespeare on film. They make the weirdest cuts because they have a visual component for film that we don't have on stage. So they start cutting language that describes things because they can show them to you. But I'm like, but that language is really, that sunset's nice, but what he says about that sunset is really good. So before I can cut a play, I have to understand the whole play. Macbeth, let's use Macbeth. Hecate, or Hecate, the master witch that shows up to talk to the 3 witches, you got to decide whether you want that in your Macbeth or not. And I will say that, Dick, my overwhelming rule is I'm a big 2 hours traffic of our stage person with Shakespeare. So outside of a couple, Hamlet, Lear, there's a few that are really tough to get down to 2. But if we know we can do a 5-minute Shakespeare play, a 30-minute Shakespeare play, a 60-minute Shakespeare play, a 90-minute Shakespeare play, what helps me cut is if I'm like, I want a 2-hour play, I can do the math and go, if I'm doing 16 to 20 lines a minute, I need to cut 600 lines from this play, which helps me know. So first, I tend to like to cut. If that's my goal, I like to know how much I got to cut to get there. Then the next thing you got to do is kind of start to figure out what's the most important part of this story to you. Okay, so I'll use Tempest. I wasn't a big fan of the fact that Prospero is never surprised by anything. Everything is something he already knows, mostly because for modern theater, I found dramatically that's not very exciting to have the main character never be surprised about anything. So I would then use that as a philosophy to cut language where he seems unshocked to see if I could generate in Prospero the ability to receive new information for it to be interesting to me. That doesn't mean that's correct. That just means that was my philosophy for the cut. So, or I know that the producer has told me I can do this play with, I have contracts to hire 10 actors. Well, this play has 18 characters. So I got to go, well, this can be doubled, but I'll also go, but this character could just be rolled into that character. I could have the same, I could make this messenger, and I can give this messenger an arc. If I can give the same actor all these messenger scenes, I can create a little story for that character that's more interesting than just, I put on a new hat. Because you double too much and the audience is like, I don't know who is who. So yeah, I like to know what's most important about the story to me, because then the things that aren't feeding that story become easier to cut. And you always know I'm going to cut something every time that is somebody in the audience's favorite part of this play. You know, it's inevitable. And all you can say is the joy of returning to these plays we know so well, because I direct a lot of Shakespeare, is to watch a new interpretation, to find a new idea. So I have to trust that the cut I've made is there. But I know when I cut Shakespeare, I leave those lines in the script. I just strike through them. So I give the actors the whole script so that when we're in rehearsal, they can see right there what is gone. And once in a while, they'll be like, can I have these 2 lines back? Because that's going to help me do this. I'll be like, absolutely. Can you help me find 2 lines to trade? And they usually are like, yeah, these 2. And I'm like, good. They have to be your lines, though. You can't be like, yeah, his whole scene. You can cut his whole scene. So I can have my speech back. So yeah, and again, it's collaborative, so it's still a negotiation. I tell my actors when they receive the script is that this is the length I want the play to be, but these are not 100% the lines we need to say. So as you're working on your character, which within a week of rehearsal, they all know their character better than you do. You know the play, they know their character, because that's the lens they're viewing it through. They're going to be able to come to me if they're honest and go, these 4 lines really would help me play this scene, you know? And sometimes I don't make them cut 4 others. I go, I agree, let's put them in, because what's 4 lines? But you can also spot the actor who comes to you with those every day. And you could be like, all right, you've spent your point. So if you want any more back, one of the ones I already gave you's got to go. So you keep it light. But I think cutting Shakespeare is an art form that is evolving. And I'm the funniest part is you go back to cut a play you've directed before and you cut it differently because you're like, oh, why did I leave that in?
Different from cuts, but substitutions. Substituting when a play has knives and swords, and all of a sudden actors are carrying automatic rifles. I've never seen a play with automatic rifles substituting for swords that made any sense.
Yeah, it rarely works. I mean, again, it's a personal philosophy, and as an actor, because I've been in all these, I think there's only 2 left I haven't been in. I've had a lot of AK-47s jammed into my hands, and I'm like, I have no words. My voice is in my gun, thou bloodier villain, in terms of giving out. Gunfights are really short, kids. You sure you want this to be 2 seconds long? As a fight director, I've definitely encountered that a lot. When I started with Shakespeare, I replaced lots of words. That first McBee I told you all about, everywhere they said ducats, I was setting it in Colorado in old miney times. I'm like, ducats is a stupid word. We're saying dollars. That's what we're going to say. And instead of going to Ireland and England, you're going to go to Montrose and Durango. Guess what? That got laughed, which was not my goal. My goal was to replace the words that were working against my concept. And I failed the play by rewriting so many words that there was not, that I took too much of the Shakespeare out of the play. But the fact remains that actors are going to encounter words sometimes that mean in Shakespeare's time are 100% different than they mean today. So I'm going to confuse the audience by saying that because they're going to think the word means this when it means this. So I do think there are places where you need to change a word. What I do in rehearsal a lot with actors is I let them change the word for rehearsal so they can connect to it. So if the word is thigh and you want to put in an expletive for a minute, because it'll help you. Great. And then I'm going to ask you to put 5 back in next week. But I want it to feel like the expletive that you used in rehearsal. So wherever possible, I like to let the actors substitute, and then I take the substitution away. But I do change words when I feel like the audience, but I only change them because I think it's going to help the audience understand. And I have audience members that come and have the play open and are reading along. They're my favorite ones to watch because I'm like, they're about to get really confused. They're about to hit an entire scene that isn't in my play, and they're about to be like, where did they go? You know, I encourage you to read along from home if you like, but I think in a live piece of theater, you really want to see it because it's a visual experience. But yeah, and in modern plays, you really can't do that, right? It's a playwright's right to do the play, and you can get in big trouble. In fact, for Santaland Diaries, I had rewritten a section when I played the part, and it worked great. And then when I stepped out, a new actor took it, and he rewrote it, and it was even better, and it made the review. And then the publisher was like, we have read a review of our play where you have changed the text, and we immediately expect you to cut that and go back to what the playwright intended. Don't mess with David Sedaris, man. He's got people. So with modern plays, if you want to change something, you really do have to contact the playwright and get permission. So that's why I like working with dead playwrights who can't call me on the phone angrily for what I have done.
Yeah.
Am I over talking, Caitlin? I'm a jabberer.
No, you're not over talking at all. It's the thing. So I've decided, and I'm going to take Al has a thing. I'm going to release Violence of Choice, the exercise. I'm going to feel real good about the fact that I planned it. It was neat. I found some short plays, y'all, and we're going to keep talking to Jeff for our last couple of minutes. Al.
I'm curious, when you start rehearsing a play, do you ever keep the actors sitting around a table other than for a first read through?
That's a really good question. I find when I was a younger actor, it's called table work. And I didn't really, because I didn't go to college a lot, I didn't really know anything about it. And suddenly I was like, how long are we at the table for? They're like, and they'll be like, a week. I'm like, a week? We're going to sit here for 6 days? Why? Because I was a movement person. I was like, I find my impulses on my feet. This is terrible. And then as I learned more about Shakespeare and did more plays, I realized that if you're not careful, you can get actors that are just speaking gibberish and haven't really unpacked the language. And if they don't really know what they're saying enough to be able to play an action, it's not going to work. And it's going to devolve into what I call mad, sad, glad, and a frad, right? They're playing an emotion. And I'm like, well, I just today was coaching a monologue for a student, and I was like, well, in this monologue, I get that you're really sad about Sylvia, but I need you to also remember things you love about Sylvia that makes you excited. And I need you to convince the audience to be on your side, because otherwise I'm going to see you're sad, and then I'm going to kind of tune out and wait for the next thing to happen, right? So table work is where we break the play apart. But if you have a cast of 35 for Grapes of Wrath, and you try and make 35 people sit at the table for 4 or 5 days while you work with basically the leads, you're going to lose the room, because they're, one, going to wish they were somewhere else, and two, they're going to start chit-chatting, and they're not going to stay. You can't hold that many people's focus for that long. They go crazy. So I do what's called hybrid table work. And what I mean by hybrid table work is the first day of a play, we read it, and then we discuss it as a group for, the full day, right? And then what I've learned for Shakespeare is that I do table work on Act 1, Scene 1. And the only people I call to that table are people who speak, who have a spoken line in Act 1, Scene 1. And we table work it, and we talk, because they all have a vested interest in the scene, because they all have something to say. And then we stage it. We immediately, after we've done the table work, get up on our feet and do a really light staging, because actors memorize their lines better when they know where they enter and they know where they cross. It just helps, right? And then we go to Act 1, Scene 2, and we do the same thing. So we do the text work, and then I have them do the text work on their feet, even if I'm going to throw out a lot of that blocking, to let them try it on their feet. And I don't call servants that have no lines. And I don't call servants that have no lines for the first blocking, because I can layer them in on the second pass. You earn all this goodwill, because the people who have very few lines don't get stuck in rehearsal watching everybody. But you also then allow them to do that. So if I'm an undergrad and I want to learn and watch, you should be there every day, all the time. But I'm not going to make you be there, because I don't want a room full of people with no lines ruining my rehearsal. Anthony Powell taught me that at Hamlet. He goes, when you're staging the play within a play, don't call all the servants, because you know what they're going to do is just start chit-chatting and laughing and distracting everybody, because they're bored and have nothing to do. don't call the dead bodies to just lay on stage. They will get ornery. I spent an 8-hour back on the floor as Paris at the Denver Center, and I wanted to kill everybody by hour 6. My body just couldn't. I was like, I can't lay. I'm 40. I can't lay on a hard wooden floor for 8 hours. What is wrong with you? And it turned out I was being punished, which is why that was happening. That's a different story. But yeah, I think table work's important. I think especially with Shakespeare, with heightened language, it's important we unpack it as a group. But I do not think it's important that every actor in the play understand every line of the play. I think that's asking a lot.
I asked the question for a couple of reasons, I guess. Number one, clearly you are a very action movement oriented individual. And the second is my own experience. I was in a production here many years ago, directed by David, and I can't think of his last name. Ed, you may remember, he directed 9 Angry Men, I think, at Theatreworks. He's a Colorado director, he was, did some things at the Aspen Summer Festival. In any event, he kept us at the table for a week. And I'd not had that experience. My involvement on stage has been in community theater kinds of productions for the most part, but I loved it. He was really good. It worked very well. And then I had an opportunity, the one and only directing experience that I've had, which I loved, at our Fountain Valley School. So I was directing kids. And when I told them that we were going to sit around the table, they were looking at me like, what's this, dude? But we did it for a number of days and things really developed very nicely. And I think it's a technique that works. And I just wanted to hear from a professional whether it's done and what the pros and cons are of doing it. So thank you.
Everyone does it a little different, but they all do some version of it. And I think the trick as a director is time management, right? It's really like, it's basic, but it's key. So, and what I mean by time management is I've met directors who they're working on a scene and it's really interesting to them. So suddenly all the scenes that they've called, they don't go there because they just keep working on that one scene because they're inspired and in the moment. And while there's nothing wrong with that, you can end up with a play that's very under rehearsed in spots when you hit tech. So usually what I do when I look at a play is I look at how many hours do I have before tech? How many hours do I have for tech? In those hours, where do I want my first run through to happen? How many runs do I think this play needs before tech? When do the designers need to see this play? When should I have them off book by? And once I have all those waypoints set, then I kind of know how much time I have to spend. And it helps me kind of manage it and not, so I might be like, well, if I got 5 weeks to work in this play, I can spend a week at the table. If I'm 2.5 weeks to tech, I probably can't spend a week at the table. So I'm always throttling my plays to the amount of hours. And when you rehearse in repertory, like at a Shakespeare festival, often I only get them 4 hours a day because the other 4 hours of their day are on a different play. So I have to then go, oh shit, we only rehearsed 3 times next week. I probably better put a run in there or they're not going to remember their lines, even though I'd like to rehearse. So you're always adjusting to the schedule, or you might be a week in and go, that actor needs more rehearsal. I can tell they either need more time to learn their lines or they just need more help. And I owe it to them. So I'm going to rehearse this a little less because it's working. So yeah, you're just constantly going, what's the problem? When I watch a scene run, I'm always like, what's most broken? Fix that first. You'll earn a lot of trust in the room. If you're ignoring the thing that's on fire while you're meticulously helping someone make a martini, everyone in the room is like, when is he going to fix the fact that we're all upstaged or whatever? So always try and fix the thing that's most broken before you indulge your whims in the weird side thing.
Now, not suggesting that anything is broken, but I'm going to grab the invitation to reflect on time management and draw our attention to the fact that our hour together is at a close. Jeff, thank you so much for this time and your thoughts. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but this is a really exciting 55 minutes. And it's been so wonderful to hear about your process and how you think through all of this thing. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think why all directors are different, we're all solving the same problems in our own ways. Like every play encounters all these problems. So it's problem solving at its best. And it's making art with a group of people is, to me, way more fun than making it alone. So thanks for wanting to know more about it. And thanks for asking great questions.
No,
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful discussion. And Gina, thanks for adding to the spirit of the season with your beautiful sweater.
Thanks. Only get to wear it once a year.
Say goodbye, Titus.
Oh my gosh.
Everybody for their time.
So good. Dog cameo. Bo, is there anything we forgot other than, of course, thanking all of these fine people for continuing to join us and the director circle You are awesome. Next time we get to talk to scenic designers who will get to gossip about how directors are so troublesome.
They will talk to some that have designed for me. They'll have lots to say about me.
Yeah,
Thanks,
mark
all.
your
I'm
calendars
gonna go-
for March 11th.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go.
Jeff.
I gotta go
Everybody.
stab Julius Caesar. I'll see you
Do
later.
it. Bye, Jeff.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.